So let's continue. I would like to introduce Thomas Nilsson from Certezza to the stage. Welcome, Thomas.
Thank you.
And I'll just lead the stage. Thank you very much.
Excellent, and thank you very much for having me. I will talk about something that I would like to call borderless e-identification. Just a few words about Certezza. We are an independent information cybersecurity company that has been providing expertise to the private and public sector for more than 25 years. I and a colleague of mine founded the company, I think it's 28 years ago now. So we start to get a little bit old and gray, as you can see, but hopefully it's full with experience. From our point of view and from my point of view, it's important to say that we are 100% value driven. Of course, we are a private company. We need to earn money, but we are very much value driven. And our mission is to build a safe and robust society by being the leading partner in information and cyber security. One example of that is that we pretty much get asked if we could help someone to, for example, be ISO 2701 certified. And if it's a check in a box that someone would like to have, we say no. We would like to do changes. My goal for today is to share my experience, what's happening in the e-identification journey in Sweden towards a borderless digital identity. The agenda, I would talk a little bit about the rise of e-identification in Sweden. Of course, share success as well as setbacks, because there have been plenty of them. I will also share some practical examples with you and the effects of that examples. And I will also talk a little bit about what we see as development areas. And then to summarize, and then we have, say, 10 minutes for a Q&A. The rise of e-identifications in Sweden, it started around the 90s. It was some kind of experimental area. We had an idea of a 24/7 services from the governments, and an important cornerstone, if was, of course, to identify all the citizens. When we're moving forward, we could see that bank ID was a good thing that happened in the beginning of the 20s. It was launched in 2003 by a consortium of major Swedish banks. The initial proposal was, of course, to create a secure way for customers to interact with the bank services. It was interesting. Almost at the same time, Telia, the biggest telecom company in Sweden, formerly owned by the government, also introduced an e-identification in parallel with bank ID. As a fundament for another e-identification called SITS, it's for the healthcare sector. And bank ID is still around, and I think they have roughly 85% of the Swedish market seeing it of the private perspective, and SITS is still around as well. And if I remember right, I think they have 550,000 certificates today, active certificates. And in the 20s, it was very much focused on the PKI. PKI, of course, we need to build this kind of solutions, but we also needed understanding of PKI to consume these e-identities. If we're moving forward, we can see in the 2010 that there will be some major changes. In the 20s, we didn't know actually how should we build the different kind of e-identifications so it will be safe and secure and we can trust them. In the beginning of 2012, we had the first national framework for e-identification. It's pretty much the same framework that we are using today. When ADAS was introduced in 2016, we could see that we had to adjust our national framework a little bit, but not that much. And the framework will make it easy for an e-service to say, okay, I need this kind of authentication level to trust the citizen or the employee that access my system. So it's like a measurement. We also could see some competitors, for example, Svenska Pass, and it has nothing to do with the passport. It's an e-identification that will be placed on the Swedish tax agency's ID card. It's important to know when we're talking about bank ID, it was a success, but it's also, you need to have somehow a relationship with the bank. And I mean, not everyone have a relationship or can have a relationship with a bank. So we know we need also to have e-identification for those. So there's Svenska Pass would fill a gap. It was also an interesting project in Huddinge. It's the 14th largest municipality in Sweden, the second largest in Stockholm, the Stockholm area. They needed an e-identification for their employees. Having the national framework, they were thinking if we can provide e-identifications that could be measured against the national framework, then we can use them outside the municipality, not just inside. I will tell you a little bit more about that soon. There was also a player called EFOS, or actually it's not the player, it's the Swedish social insurance agency that provided a solution for the other organizations that couldn't use SITs like in the healthcare sector. BankID also got a competitor like Freja, and Freja was a mobile solution. BankID from the start was just on the card, and we can see if we're looking or thinking about the success. The success was when BankID was start using the mobile app instead of the smart card. You can see a huge increase. I would also like to say something about how we consume the identifications. And we move pretty much from having a direct relationship with the PKI from the e-services and use SAML instead. And we can also see that we were building SAML federations. I will also talk about them a little bit more soon. And now we're moving to the 2020s. And now we start talking about the wallet. We have an update on ADAS. We'll probably go live next year. And then every country should have the wallet. I should talk a little bit more about that soon as well. We can also see more competitors. The host for today, Pointsharp. They have their solution that is now audited and accepted as an e-identification for the employees. So I think it's a big step for Sweden, and it's a big step for Pointsharp and the customers, of course, as well. We will see a few more coming up in the coming years. I don't think there will be that many, but say 4 or 5. And then we are moving forwards to the OpenID Connect area. It's a more modern way to consume e-identifications. But saying that, I won't say that the SAML area is gone. I will say we will somehow stay with both of them. A big discussion in Sweden is we're talking about my private eID. The bank ID is my private eID, and I can't use it when I'm, for example, accessing services working for my company. But as we know, it's possible to drive the car with a private driving license, even if it's for business. So I think it's important to sort this discussion a little bit. And from a Swedish perspective, we are thinking at the difference between the eIDs for the individuals and for the employees is the method of acquisition. For the employees, there's a focus from a company side to provide e-identifications for all our colleagues. And just a few words of the actors, where I will talk a little bit more about Bank ID. In 2003, they had the mobile Bank ID, and that was, as I said earlier, a success. But we can also see moving forward, some players will probably not be around. I say probably, we don't know for sure. And that's Telia and Svenska Pass. And I think the new Swedish eID that we will see next year will probably change the market a little bit. I will also say a few words about Huddinge. When they had their solution ready, we could see, in fact, that almost none of the e-services were willing to accept that e-identification. I think it was a little bit too early. If someone would do the same thing today, I think it will be a success. But in 2013, 2014, it was not. It's a little bit sad, I would say. What is the successes and what is the setbacks? I think we have two things that was very important for us. We had the Swedish population register ready to use, and every citizen also have a personal identity number. I think that it's the cornerstones to succeed. I was talking also about the mobile Bank ID as a success. We can also see that the national trust framework worked well. I mean, we can also see a good acceptance for the SAML federations for the education sector. But on the other hand, we have been working a lot, for example, in the healthcare sector, and struggling around and have problems. I mean, everyone won't accept that kind of solutions. We have a lot of discussions during the years that haven't moved us further. And I think that's sad. I will also say that we have a low acceptance, or we had, it's better now, for other than Bank ID. But I mean, Huddinge, they aren't using that solutions anymore. Svenska Pass, doesn't have that many users, and Freya is coming up, but they have been fighting and fighting a lot. So that's a little bit about the success and setbacks. And I think I will share some practical examples. And I have picked 3. It's the digital national test that the Swedish National Agency for Education is bringing on. A little bit about electronic health record from a regional administrative body in the western Sweden, and the Swedish e-health agency and the Swedish national medicine list. I have chosen these examples because I think that they are interesting. They are thinking in the same way that we should have borderless e-identification. I can also have examples that in Sweden that is struggling with just few players, and I don't think that's the way forward. If we start with a digital national test, that has been on paper for many years, and I think it's roughly 5-6 years ago when the Swedish National Agency for Education decided to move from papers and have a digital platform for this. And we can find different way forwards, of course. But when we're doing this now, we can see that we have a lot of infrastructures that we didn't have from the beginning. We now have federations that almost every school or municipality are connected to. We also have e-identifications for the employees. And if we connect those components together, and we have the trusted framework as a cornerstone, then it's up to the Swedish National Agency for Education to just say, okay, we need an identifier. In this area, EPPN is quite common. And we also need to decide an assurance level. And in this case, it's on level of assurance 2, or if we talk ADAS, which low. And that is for the teachers. For the students, there aren't any. It's not. I would say they are only accessing their own tests. So we need to know for sure that it's the right student that's doing the test, but they don't access that critical information like the teacher, so we don't have the same demand. So I think it's a good example, and the first test will take place in November. I think it's 26th of November. And it's roughly 1,000 of school authorities, including all the municipalities, that is connected this way. The next example is from a regional administrative body in the western Sweden. It's called VGR, and they are responsible for healthcare serving, I think it's nearly 2 million inhabitants. And it's pretty much like the previous example, but it's on a higher level. And it's not that many organizations that will be connected, but it's roughly, I think, the same amount of people that need access. And it's the same component. We have the infrastructure, we have the framework. So from the e-services perspective, we have to decide what identifier should be used. And in the healthcare sector, they're using an organizational ID that is it's called HSA ID. And it's like an organization number following by a pseudonym. And the minimum authority, the level of assurance is 3 regarding to the Swedish framework, or if we're talking in ADAS terms, it's substantial. And the final example, it's actually a whole other picture, but they share a lot, and it's also interesting because it's access to an API. It's not access to the e-service. The scenario is that someone needs to have access to a system, and the system itself should access this API to get access to the Swedish national medicine list. And here we are combining two different technologies. On the right-hand side, it's almost the same scenarios that you have seen on the previous pictures, but from the e-service that you are connected to, you are changing from using SAML over to OpenID Connect. So you are connecting two different technologies to building a trust chain that starts with the e-identification and then continue to include the IDP, the SAML IDP, and then moving forward to the system that should consume the SAML assertion and act as an OAuth client to the API. And it's been a lot of work going on, and as I mentioned earlier, in the education sector, I think that the federation and the initiatives been working well. In this sector, there's a lot of opinions in different directions. This project is going a little bit slower, but I think that's the right way forward, even if it's quite complex. And I think the biggest thing here is that you have to change the system. Actually, the systems that it's quite old, and maybe they didn't fit in this technology yet. But for sure, they will do in the next year or two, is my guess. So when sharing these different examples with you is just to bring up how we can access systems in different way. But it's all started with we have an identification that is audited, that is accepted, and we have the framework. And when we're building this kind of infrastructure, I would say that it's not that difficult to onboarding new organizations, and we don't need unique identifications. If we're looking forward a couple of years ago, and I will be honest to say it's the same in many cases today as well, you need a separate e-identification to get access. And the only thing that the e-identification should tell the e-service, that is, who am I? Just the identification, nothing else. And having a lot of them doesn't make it more secure, probably is otherwise. So with this kind of infrastructures that I've been showing, I think that we can reduce the need for unique identifications for each service. As well, it's easier to onboarding organizations. But for many organizations, they don't have all the components today. And I would say it's a good idea to have, so you can be a part of this kind of ecosystem. We haven't talked that much about regulatory compliance, but in all these scenarios, we can talk about GDPR, for example, and all of these scenarios have had that in mind. So when we are saying that we need an e-identification on level of assurance 2 low or level of assurance 3 high, that's because of GDPR and other regulations. And finally, we can have single sign-on, of course. And it's also possible, as you know, to disable whenever needed, but it's possible to have single sign-on. I think that's probably the best effect when we're talking from a user perspective. The areas that we should development in, I think it's these three. I mean, if we talk a while, we can find more, but let's focus on this. The multiple identifiers, e-identifications for AI, and the European Digital Identity Wallet, the EUDI wallet. In the examples that I presented, the identifier varied in each case. And I was talking in the beginning on the Swedish personal identity number, and it's both a success and it's a challenge. It's considered today as a highly sensitive data according to GDPR. So we are reducing it for several reasons, and we need other identifiers. So that's a big thing going on. When I was talking about the example of the digital national test, they were choosing the EPPN. It's a EU person principal name, and that is a unique identifier that have been around for many years in different organizations worldwide. And it's like a pseudonym. If you've seen it, it can be more like an email address, but it's important to see it as a pseudonym more than an email address. It should be unique all the time, of course, but it's a good example that we don't actually need that many identifiers. But then we have this. It's not easy to be see what is the way forward here. And then a little bit about ADAS 1.0. It didn't address this. So I mean, ADAS is not a success, I would say. We have the framework, but it didn't lead that way that I think that we wanted. And a good question is, will ADAS, the update of ADAS, it's an update, it's not a new version, but it's easier to talk about a new version. I'm not sure. I say I will believe it when I see it, and I hope that we will solve it. So I think the way forward right now is to developing capabilities to handle multiple identifiers. The next area is e-identification in AI. We have a new component with no legal capacity, but it's need and unique identifier and some kind of level of assurance depending on how this AI components work. And we think the way forward, the way forward is to have an approver. We need to have a registration authority that can work in this area. I mean, that's one way forward, and I think that we will see a different way of doing this. But how we're working right now, we think this is the way forward. And it's also important to see this AI component and as both a component, and then you can think about the device. But somehow we also need to see it as a human, and then we need access to information, to systems. So we have to think in both ways. And just a short word about the European Digital Identity Wallet. I think that we should understand the components here. understand that we have data providers. We have providers that will provide this data, compare it with an IDP, and we have the relaying parties. And depending on what kind of organization you are, you have to find your roles in this. Maybe the first step is to be the relaying party that can consume information in the wallet. But it's very important to have this on the roadmap. And to summarize, I can say that we are making progress, but I can also say that there will be more bumps along the way. There have been so many discussions within the country on different way forwards, and we will continue with that. And also think it's a little bit sad when I meet customers that have an e-identification in the organization, but it's only working within the organization. And maybe it's their choice. But I meet customers that thought that this would be working outside the organization. So I think we have to move forward and have as good quality as possible in these solutions so it can be used outside the organization when needed. I think the national framework for e-identification that we have that is built on ADAS was a very important cornerstone. I can't see how we could move forward without it. As I mentioned in the beginning, it was written around 2011, if I remember right. It was 2010, and it's almost the same framework today. So it's something that we should be proud of. And what I don't like is the e-service provider that do not accept all audited e-identifications. They are roadblocks. So when we have a huge amount of e-identification that cannot be used, it's definitely not the way forward. Finally, I think that the EUD wallet needs killer apps from the start to succeed. It could be another project from EU, but it can also be a success. And I think that you should bring with you that you should have capacity to consume the wallet's content to start with. And now I think it's time to open up for questions and answers.
Thank you so much, Thomas. That was very interesting to hear about it. I don't know about the audience, but for me it was also a history lesson about e-identification in Sweden. It was interesting to see the complexity of those projects, those huge projects as well, and the time it takes to finish them or continue on them. I noticed this is something I take for granted. It's easy to forget how much work people put in to develop this. So thank you very much.
Yeah, it's a lot of work, but I will also say it's not the best work sometimes.
Yeah, understand. We have some questions. The first question is, do you see a role for FIDO2 tokens on the e-identification market?
The easy answer is yes. I would say everything that is open, it's the right way forward. I think that you can see that I get a little bit frustrated when I'm talking about things that are blocking. And I think the openness is the way forward. So I would say yes every time.
Yeah, definitely. I agree as well. Perfect. Thank you very much. Let's see. Do we have any more? Yeah, we do. It's going to pop up in any second now. There we go. So the question is, what does it mean that it works only inside the organization? If a German customer has a plant in Brazil, it does work in Brazil, or it could not in Brazil because the employee is in another country. So I think the question is, how does it matter when it comes to the borderless part?
Yeah, I'm thinking the borderless part from the more regulation perspective. But if you have employees all around the world, it's your own rules. But
Mm.
it's when you're playing outside the organization, you need to understand how you should play. And within the EU, we have the same framework today, so it's much easier. But when we're moving outside EU, it's you have to be more updated how they are thinking in different areas in the world.
Yeah, definitely keep that in mind. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think a good example, if you are in the university, you can see that they have been able to connect organizations worldwide using the same framework, thinking almost the same. So I mean, it's possible, but
Mm.
we need to find a way forward.
Yeah. Thank you very much. We have another question. So the question is, how can private companies profit from the European ADAS? I was thinking that employees can authenticate with their EID for remote onboarding, but what more use cases are there?
And I think that's a good use case.
Mm.
If you can have something that you can, instead of going to the registration authority, you can have an e-identification that you can onboard to your own system. And the only thing from a Swedish perspective, for example, Bank ID do not allow that. But if we are talking within ADAS, I don't know if there is any limitations. So I think that's a good way forward. And I also think that the e-identities that we have and sharing in Europe, we can use them. But actually, we don't right now. We have some waiting rooms to access and nothing more. And I think we can do more.
Mm. Mm. Perfect. Thank you very much. Just gonna look over my shoulder again. Yeah, another question. Perfect. I want to remind everyone once again, just if you have any questions, just write them in the private chat, so they'll pop up on the screen here as well. So the question is, do you know about EID development in other European countries like Germany or France?
I don't have in mind all the details, but on the European market, I wouldn't say that Sweden is the best.
Mm.
When we are talking about, for example, signing, we are probably one of the worst. So when you're looking around in EU, you can see companies that have many more players than we have. Uh, and for sure, everyone that is listed on the European trust list, they are audited and they are ready to play. So I would say that the market is up and running, and we can use it more than we do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
And from a
definitely.
Swedish perspective, we have to learn from other European countries, especially when we come to signing.
Yeah. Perfect. Thank you very much. I think that was all questions. Very good questions, I might say.
Yeah,
And thank you
excellent
very much.
questions. And it's
Yeah,
interesting to have this dialogue uh, across.
definitely. It's very important. But with that said, thank you very much, Thomas. We
Thanks.
are on time, so that's perfect.